My first paid live gig was a band called Fischer's Ed, who'd sold 2 or 3 million records in Germany, and it was Rock am Ring. And I walked out. He wasn't after Aswad, who had this incredible sound engineer that blew my mind. What this guy was doing with effects was just crazy. Loads of dub stuff, and which influenced me later. And I walked out, and it was a PM3000, which has the pan pot where the gain is on most desk sound, the gain where the pan is. And it had VCAs, and I kind of walked up to this guy. It was a Clare Brothers system, and I walked up to this, what appeared to be a giant of a man at the time, and said, listen, I've got to be honest, I kind of fibbed a bit. I've never done a live gig, and if I mess up, will you please save me? And the guy went, yeah, go for it. So I kind of went for it, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it. You know, I obviously didn't have a sound check. It was a festival. Straight in there, line checked on headphones, went for it, and I was still alive at the end of the gig. And I turned to the guy and said, how did I do? And in his very deep American accent, he said, well, you overloaded my Rev 7. And he seemed very upset by this, but I thought, if that's the worst I did on my first gig, I'm going to do all right. And from then on, I classed myself as a live front of house engineer, and just kind of winged it for a bit to learn the skills that you need to do it. And I ended up having a whole summer of festivals under the same circumstances, and obviously learning my craft as I went along. If you've got the confidence to walk out on stage and do it, or the confidence to mix for, you know, even if it's 500 people or 5,000 people or 50,000 people, take that chance and make sure you've done your homework. Make sure that you know the band inside out. Make sure that you absolutely have done as much prep as you can, but take the risk, because if you don't take the risk, you'll never know. And no one's going to give you an opportunity if you don't create the opportunity for yourself or take the opportunity when it's presented. You know, when I first started, it's kind of smiley faces and stuff like that. And then I did a tour supporting Lenny Kravitz. And Tom, their front of house guy, his front of house guy is this, you know, massive history engineer. You know, he did the first Meatloaf album. And I watched him EQing, and he was just putting one frequency out at a time rather than these smiley faces that I'd done, you know. And it really taught me about this resonance thing and understanding how boxes resonate. Also how, you know, when boxes cross over and stuff like that, you get these kind of like overtones and all sorts of things, and harmonics in rooms and stuff. So I kind of feel like that approach isn't necessarily how everyone does it, but I kind of feel like it's the kind of foundation of me creating the sound. And the other thing I do, particularly mixing analog, is I often mix on the gain pots, because at various points you can drive the channel harder, you can drive the effects harder, and sometimes, as the guy from Clare Brothers said, I will overdrive his Rev 7. And you know, in my personal rack, I've got an old SDD 3000, and one of my favorite things to do is to drive it into mega feedback and find the sweet spot where it holds, and it just kind of goes into destruction. And certainly when I was mixing Moloko, I'd grab a long note from the singer and then just hold it and bring it, fade it out, and then fade it back in at the end, by which time it's this kind of like tone, but it's a tone of crunch. And there was one particular number where I'd do that and hold it, and then just on that particular unit, if you hit the depth button, I think it was, on the modulation, you could tune it down, and it's just great, man. You could just kind of like grab a sample and then tune it down into sub and finish the number like that. And so I tend to be quite creative with the band as well, and will take absolute risks. I prefer analog because, you know, I started out as a musician, and I can play the desk and the effects like an instrument. I very much zone out when I'm mixing a show. Obviously, you've got the first couple of shows where you're kind of pulling your hair out and trying to get it right, but you kind of get into the flow. And for me, analog allows me to do 3 or 4 things at the same time. I can be adjusting a ratio on a comp, I can be driving the channel harder on the gain, and I can be holding the feedback on a delay, or whacking some parameter up on a reverb, all at the same time without having to go through pages. And then on digital, obviously, you can do that. You can have preset things, but you can't grab something and do it as a moment of inspiration. And I tend to not, even if I'm on digital, preset every single number. I tend to think in my head, what does this number need? And obviously you get into patterns, but I tend to change the effects or the EQs or whatever it is that I need to do on the fly, because, you know, the musicians are a source of variance. at every show. And even if you've got a degree of playback, the musicians are going to play differently. The room's going to sound different depending on humidity. You know, it could be anything that's different. And so I want to be able to react to that. And I want to feel that flow. And I want to feel the music and to be able to react to it accordingly. And I have friends who are really magnificent engineers who are the opposite end, that like to have everything preset and they like to know that everything's right, and they will adjust accordingly. But, you know, my pet peeve is watching engineers standing still behind a desk with their arms folded, because there's always something, not that I'm over fiddling, but there's always some way of making the show better. Sound has changed so dramatically from an end user experience that they want something that recreates that in a show, and certainly line array and digital desks do a very good job of that because of the summing and because of the way that the line array compresses. It's a similar-ish experience.